Welcome to today's webinar, AI in Education, Effective and Ethical Uses, sponsored by NetSupport. My name is Maggie Layfield, and I'll be your moderator for today. Now, although AI has been around for years, as anyone could tell you, we know it has skyrocketed onto the scene in the last year or so, courtesy of open AI platforms and a lot of changes that have been made. Now, schools at the K-12 and collegiate levels are grappling with how to regulate its use, leverage it to improve instruction and educational outcomes, and innovate the teaching process, while also navigating the murky waters of copyright, plagiarism, and potential misuse. So our guests today bring not only years of experience in the education and IT fields, but they also have the unique distinction of being active members of the bar. As such, it's important that we mention that their opinions are their own and their comments do not constitute legal advice. However, they do have some great insight into the legal aspects of AI, as well as the educational and IT aspects. So now that your interest is a little bit piqued, let me introduce our guest. Rachelle is an EdTech Consultant, presenter, attorney, author, and teacher. She is an ISTE certified educator and a Microsoft Innovative Educator expert. She received the ISTE Making It Happen Award in 2019 and has received several Presidential Gold and Silver Awards for her volunteer service to education. Rachelle was also named one of the 150 women thought leaders to follow for 2022 and one of 30 K-12 IT influencers for 2021. In 2017, Rachelle was selected as the 2017 Outstanding Teacher of the Year by PAECT, that's the Pennsylvania Association for Educational Communications and Technology, the PA affiliate basically of ISTE, and by the NSBA as one of the 20 to watch educators. She's written 8 books and is an active blogger. She presents regularly at state, national, and international conferences, and she provides professional development and coaching for educators on a variety of topics, including assessments, emerging technologies such as AI, AR and VR, and STEM. And as the VP and CIOP of Creighton University in Nebraska, Russ oversees a diverse information technology team that caters to Creighton's campuses globally, including Omaha and Phoenix. His primary focus revolves around driving the adoption of digital technologies and leveraging innovative solutions to enhance business outcomes. Russ also holds a license to practice law in Texas, focused on technology, cybersecurity, privacy, intellectual property, and advancements in technology law, particularly in the realm of artificial intelligence. So we are delighted to have you both here today. Thank you so much for joining us on our panel. We appreciate you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to start with a super easy question. Given the way the AI landscape has changed so rapidly in the past few years, what do you think it's going to look like in 2024 and 2025? What should we expect?
No, Russ, you want to go? You want me to go?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's amazing how much it has changed, and this is something that I've been teaching about, presenting on, writing about for 6 years now, which is hard to believe because I dove into it. But I can say that even just in the past year, the amount of things that are impacting not just in education, but just in the world. I mean, every day there are so many things coming in the news of different uses of AI in all areas of work and life. And so, 2024 and 25 is not that far away. And I think, wow, as much as it has changed in this past year, how fast is probably going to move at twice that speed, especially in areas, when it comes as a teacher, we're looking at lots of resources that are available for educators, but even in different areas of work, a lot of the functionalities and the different tasks that people have in their jobs, I think are going to be, workflow is going to be streamlined because of AI. And I know every day I log into something that I'm using, whether it's email or a presentation, and there's the symbol. It's like some new AI feature is just everywhere I look now. It's involved in everything. And so it'll be interesting to see how things change, and then to be able to look back and think, oh, well, a year ago, like, who would have thought this? With all things with technology, this is just moving really fast. So Russ, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, and I hope I don't come in as a curmudgeon on this, but I don't anticipate a lot. There was someone named Roy Amara, who was president of the Future Institute, and he came up with something that's been coined as Amara's Law, which is that we tend to underestimate technology in the long term and tend to overestimate it in the near term. And so, this is certainly, 1996 is when I got my master's degree focused on artificial intelligence. And so obviously I've been following it for a long time. And what I'm really seeing now is we just have so much more power and so much more folks focused on this area that we're seeing a much more widespread. But I'm not surprised at all about sort of where we are over the last couple of years. I've really been seeing that coming. In fact, I wrote a law review article in 2018 talking about how are we going to deal with copyright issues with AI, because you started to see that coming. So I think really it's going to be how humans are, adopting. And I think Rachelle that was implied in her answer as well, which is how are we incorporating it into what we do on a workday basis, how we look at workflows, how we look at generative AI, how we look at those things that all of a sudden just really sort of became very popular all of a sudden, and start to incorporate those into our daily lives. So I think really over the next couple of years, I see that as sort of the humanistic response to these technologies becoming more broadly available. And then, I think the advances on the technology side are going to be probably seemingly slow. But like I said, you're going to look up in 5 years from now and look back and go, oh, wow, that was huge. And so, it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
100%. It reminds me of when the internet came around, and it was like this big boom. What is this? What's going to happen with this? And then no one would have thought when it first happened, this is where we'd be today with all the access to information, how it would have played out. And it's very much the human element, like you said. We can maybe predict technology, but we can't predict what people are going to do with technology. There's so many things that could happen. And you brought up a good point of it's what the teachers are going to do on their day-to-day that's really going to drive the impact that AI has. So Rachelle, you as a classroom teacher, and specifically as a teacher of Spanish and as STEAM classes, how have you already incorporated AI into the classroom? What are you doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, so in my STEAM course, it's a course that I basically made up years ago because I was teaching students how to program hummingbird robots for 2 years. And then we moved that to the younger grades. And so I had a chance to just basically create a course. So I focus it on digital citizenship first because the kids need to understand how to interact online, but a lot of things with coding and AI is a big component of what we do. So in my class, the STEAM course, we go through, what is it? How does it work? Where do we see it? What are the benefits? We talk about ethics. Like there's lots of conversations, definitely a lot of exploration. I have some of my students who have been doing some work with some like autonomous vehicles and doing some coding and trying to figure that out. And then also looking at like when ChatGPT use the game-based learning tools, for example, have, personalized learning that you can, basically the kids start on one same question, and then as they respond based on their response time, the accuracy of their responses, if there's trends. As a teacher, if I have them work on a worksheet, I can understand, where they are in the learning journey. But if I want that quick glimpse, some of those tools that are able to, as the kids are responding, track their progress and see that they're missing a certain concept repeatedly, and then give them extra questions, that's something I use in class. But also as a language teacher, the translators that are out there, it's not something new. They've been around for a long time. Even since like the 1990s, there were translators available, whether human or computer or machine-aided translation. And those are things that I'll bring into my Spanish class that we'll test out and see the accuracy and, when it's right and when it's not, and how, as humans, we can understand based on context what somebody says. My favorite example is if I say, I want a bat for my birthday. Most people would figure that I wanted a bat for baseball. But what if I wanted the animal bat? A human would infer, but a computer would not necessarily know that. And so we explore a lot of things. We talk about the ChatGPT. I've used it with my Spanish classes to just come up with different ideas and questions and funny project prompts and things, just to embrace it so they see, how it can be used effectively and responsibly and ethically. So, but I just try to pull it in for, to help to support them because we're surrounded by it. So.
Those are excellent ideas. And obviously you've really embraced technology. That's kind of your background. You love it. You've been involved with it for years. And honestly, Russ has been talking about AI for years as well too. But let's look at the other end of the spectrum. Those instructors, professors, teachers who maybe are technology shy or who are brand new to AI, where do you feel like are the best places to start with them, whether it's using it in the classroom or getting some professional development or getting help so they can use it the right way in their instruction and in the classrooms?
Yeah, I'll take this one first, which is, I think that what's great now, as you talk about the internet, the amount of resources that are available are really incredible. I know that, places like Udemy or Coursera has a number of both free and paid courses. There's actually one that I think is really great that is sort of a topical AI for non-technologists that sort of gets into it. And then there's, some of the more detailed classes where you could actually do some coding and play with the tools. I think it's important also to sort of take a step back because AI, when we think of Chat GPT and generative AI, that's just one area of AI, right? At Creighton, for example, we use multiple different types of AI, from robotic process automation to be able to, scan forms and process business work, from using AI machine learning on data for looking for where we have patterns of education of our students or how they're engaging at the university where maybe they need a reach out. They stopped going to the library when they used to regularly, or they stopped going to the dining hall. These can be indicators of other things. So there's not just the conversational AI pieces out there. There's a whole lot of other things. And then if you really want to get deep into it, I love, MIT and Stanford has been very generous in terms of putting a lot of their courses online. For somebody like me, you have to brush up on your college math to be able to really follow along sometimes. But I think that's great. And the other thing I would say is that I've learned a lot just by talking to a lot of folks. I think there's so many people that are having a lot of the same reactions we are about, well, what are you doing with this and how are you thinking about it? And I think it really piques some interest. I even recently had a conversation with my wife, asking her, as somebody she does financial analysis for large financial services company, and I asked her about it. What are you guys doing with it? And her perspectives were very different than the way I thought about it. So, and then of course there's a number of podcasts out there and everything. So, happy to sort of link or share some of the ones that I listen to or whatnot. But I think there's just, a lot of information, and maybe the one thing I would encourage folks is it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like you can't keep up, that there's something new every day. And I would suggest everybody feels that same thing, but as long as you're getting some of the core, you're understanding some of the fundamentals, I think then when something else comes out, it doesn't surprise you, and you're able to understand it and assimilate it a lot better. So that's why I kind of, to some cases, encourage even the non-technical folks to at least put their hands on it more. Even, Chat GPT, there are both courses out there and cheat sheets and different things on how to use that tool effectively. Because if you just type in, hey, write me a poem, it comes out with something else, versus act as Mark Twain, write a 4-stanza poem, incorporate this topic. And the prompt engineering can be quite substantial in terms of how you use that tool more effectively.
Oh yeah, and if I could add too, like the points that Russ mentioned, like a lot of those online course providers have, for free too, which is great because some of them can be quite costly when it comes to learning, professional development. And the nice thing is, the other day I was doing some research, especially looking at some of the offerings, and like Microsoft Educator Center has a course. I found one, it was like AI 101. There are some organizations like AI for K-12, AI4all.org, and a lot of them that have even beyond like learning about it. But if you're thinking about just starting to bring in the classroom and thinking, where do I begin? Because there's so many different resources, like they have lessons that you can start with. And that's the nice thing about it, is like, you don't have to start from scratch because, as a classroom educator, I get it. Like, where do you find the time? And when you find the resources, when do you find the time to go through them? But a lot of those organizations have vetted a lot of these different products, and they provide information so that if you do want to dive into it more, you have lesson plans, you have guidance, and of course, in that community, you have support. And for me, ISTE, which, if anybody is not familiar, International Society for Technology and Education, they offer a course as well. And I was fortunate to take that course, I think 5 years ago. And it was phenomenal. It took you through all the components of it. So if you're thinking, I don't know where to begin, it's overwhelming, it can be for sure, because it's changing so quickly. And I said to somebody last week, like every day I read so much, or I listen to podcasts, like Russ had said, and then the next day I still feel like I'm suddenly like 7 days behind the news, because even throughout the day, it's just amazing what's being done with it. But you have to start somewhere, and understanding and just picking one thing too, like the ChatGPT, like the write a poem. I always say like clear, concise, specific, assign it a role. Because if you just say like, what is artificial intelligence? You're going to get a lot of information. But if you say, explain AI to me like I'm a fifth grader, or you are a teacher, how would you explain this to a fifth grader? Give some examples. But you have to test it out. That's the biggest thing. Don't be afraid that you are not going to know the answers, that you will be stuck if the student has a question, if you're teaching about it, because we're all learning together.
That's so true. And really, it's one of those things where I think in the last 50 years, especially like our generations and our kids' generations and things, they are learning technology as it happens. It's not like it's always been around. It's it pops up, and now we always talk about like my 3-year-old can use an iPad better than I can, kind of jokes and funny things like that, because they grow up with it and it's natural, whereas it's totally new for us. So there is an adoption process, and of course it's going to take time to do that. So if schools are wanting to adopt AI, they're wanting to use it, like Russ said, in a way to understand student behavior and make sure that students aren't at risk, or if they're wanting to use it in the classroom to alleviate instruction and save time, how would you encourage schools to embed AI into those elements to help support students and staff, whether that's a program they should use or just some steps they could take now to begin slowly incorporating it?
I can maybe talk about, at Creighton, some of the things that we've done as part of our strategy related to AI is actually we put in a couple of pillars around actually teaching our faculty on how to use AI. And we are a Jesuit university. So one of the things we started with there also is some of the ethical considerations, right? Because you get into some equity bias. You can certainly, there's an old story about Microsoft put a chat bot out to the public, and this was about 6 years ago, and it could respond to tweets and different things. And basically people taught it to be a very racist, xenophobic, horrible sort of chat thing. I don't know what to call it. And Microsoft took it down within a couple of days, just because people were really messing with it. Just like you put Alexa in the house, at some point you ask Alexa what it's wearing, right? It's just sort of human nature to sort of figure out how far you can go with it. So some of that ethical foundations I think is really important. And that gets into, again, some of maybe the legal thoughts around, you don't want to be putting confidential information out there. You don't want to be putting sensitive information out there. Certainly in the educational space, you don't want to be putting student records or other information out into these tools. But maybe to get to the more pragmatic aspect of what you're asking. So for us, it was building those educational programs and saying, first we're going to talk about some of the foundations, and then actually building resources for folks to be able to start working with and using the tools. And then we've developed a number of policies related to where we're encouraging faculty to use AI. One of the good examples of that I saw that I thought was really interesting is within our English composition classes, where they are actually having the students have ChatGPT generate essay responses, and then they're having the students grade the essay from ChatGPT. And so, what was good about it, what wasn't good about it, getting into more of those critical thinking aspects of education that are really sort of, core to what we're trying to teach our students. I thought that was great. And then we've also done the same thing on the student side, where we've created a program of things for our students. Interestingly enough, Rachelle, I don't think you and I have talked about this before, but one of our students in our business school built a robot with a Spanish interface. And what he said was he really prefers talking to the AI to sort of teach him Spanish than going to a tutor or going to a human, because when he makes mistakes, he feels more protected on that. In that case, he actually got it so that it sort of figured out what level of Spanish you are and sort of responded at a similar level, and then tried to push you a little bit. So, giving access to those tools and having our students learn about what's available has become, really big opportunity for them as well. So I think those intentional programs But again, it has to be on both sides. I think I saw a question that came up in the panelist thing about, a worry about our students getting more advanced in these tools than we are. Absolutely. I mean, they live and breathe this stuff. They love it. They're all, digital natives, and, not all of us are as technologically advanced, but if we can really intentionally be working with our faculty and students and sharing some similar sort of instruction and how they're doing it, I think it really helps both equalize the playing field as well as make sure that students don't feel like they're cheating and faculty don't feel like students are cheating, and that we're really using the tools in an effective way.
Yeah, and if I could add on to everything that Russ said, like, absolutely. A lot of schools, it's tough to find the time for like PD. And that's a lot of the research I've been doing just to see, as part of my dissertation actually, is focused on AI and the professional development in general. But when it comes to it, in my school, I did a session back in, I think, November, because I had said to my superintendent, we really need to talk about AI because teachers have questions. There's all of these things that are happening. How does it impact the work that we're doing and academic integrity and all of those concerns that everybody has? And so I did a session similar to ones I've done at conferences and so forth over the years, but more catered to, knowing the teachers in my school. And I started with the basics, like, what is it? What are the, what is machine learning? What are algorithms? Just very general, like, talking points so people understand it. Okay, how does it work? Where are we seeing benefits of it in education? What are some concerns? And talking about like the ethics and the bias. And then I dove into a couple of tools, not to be super overwhelming, but I tried to pick some that are very versatile, that doesn't matter what grade level content area you teach, that offer anything and everything, or in different categories too. And I think that whenever you start with, everybody has kind of the same frame of reference of like what it is. Okay, these are our policies, so there's not confusion about it. And that's a struggle because a lot of schools, weren't necessarily prepared for how fast this is moving, and they're adjusting. But I think we've always had to do that because as technology evolves, like, we have new issues that come up. But when it comes to things like academic integrity and plagiarism, those aren't new issues. We've had those issues, I mean, back even in the 1900s, like when I was in school and in college, like, you could get somebody to do your work for you as a student, or even as an adult, you could ask for help. But with academic integrity and the plagiarism, we have to have those conversations, and it's the same as that students could do in the past. It just looks different. It probably happens and can occur a lot faster because of the technology that they can use. And so having opportunities for teachers, to work together, to share ideas, especially if you always have the range where it's like, yes, let's dive into the technology, and oh, wait, hold on a minute, and then everything in between. And so when you bring everybody together and there's some consistency in the support provided and resources and guidelines and things that are shared and part of a conversation, that definitely helps as you move forward, so that you have like the mindset of like, okay, this is how we're going to work with this. And then we'll take a point and we'll reflect on it and see if we have to like realign things and shift gears a little bit.
I think what I'm hearing from both of you is that it's taking the approach of assuming people are going to have questions, they're going to want information, and then you have to kind of start from the base of, let's make sure we're all at the same level, before we kind of go up from there. So explain, like what you said, Rachelle, explain to me like I'm a fifth grader, explain to me like I don't know what machine learning is. And then from there, you can help people get to a level of, this is where I feel comfortable, this is how I want to incorporate it, which I think is really helpful because, again, kids are more likely to adopt technology faster than a lot of adults are. So they're going to be jumping on wanting to use this. And then we naturally are like, no, don't touch it at all because I don't know how it works. And now I'm frightened. And then we're missing out on opportunities to really do some good with it. But like anything, there are pros and cons to both sides. So what safeguards should schools have in place? And that can look like a lot of things. But what safeguards should schools have in place to help protect both students and staff, and then also to educate students and staff on the good and the bad of AI? What should we be doing to help get them ready for and be aware of how this could go different directions?
Rachelle, you want to start?
Oh, I was going to throw it to you for that because I'm so interested in just at the university level too, how you're, I mean, the key is, one, the conversations have to happen. And I think having a space where people, whatever those concerns are, for me last year was everybody was coming to me like, well, it's the end of teaching. Like, what are we going to do? And the kids are going to be accessing all these things. I'm like, they've had access to the internet for like their whole life. Like, it's okay. So we have to really think about, our instructional methods and our practices and those things. But schools definitely, by having something that's set up, even if it's not super like involved and extensive as far as like guidelines and things, but just a couple like parameters that are set up. And I know some teachers ask like, well, what if I assign an essay and the student just gives me the essay right back, fully written by ChatGPT? Like, how do I avoid that? And I said, well, it comes down to your policies. And that was in that session I did with my school. And I just thought off the cuff, like, well, if you give them, oh, you need 5 resources, one of them can be ChatGPT, but it can only be used for like this portion. You have to identify it and cite it. Like that's what, and I've heard other people have been doing that. So I was like, okay, that it's a potential, and not all kids would use it, but having that guidance and some consistency across the board, whether it's within a department, your school, but seeing what people's concerns are or what they're actually seeing in the classroom. But I think also it's important to make sure that the families are involved too and have an understanding of like what the school's policies are, so that we're providing the support and the guidance between home and school, because that's going to go a really long way too to help kids figure out like when to use it, how to use it, and also to inform teachers like, how are the kids using it beyond our classroom, and what are some other concerns, considerations that we need to think of as well? So that's just a little bit of my initial thoughts, but I can't wait to hear from Russ.
Yeah, higher ed, I think we have a little bit more freedom because, really, I think we look at how we're preparing students for the future, and part of that is AI, right? So, we don't look to turn away on those tools. We're really looking to see how we can incorporate them effectively. But, with that in mind, Rachelle, let me start off with, you're absolutely right. So one of the first things we did was write policy and make it clear to our students what we consider to be academic integrity. And that, we also had all of our faculty be very clear when they publish their syllabus to their students that they have a statement on the use of AI and other tools. Does this class allow it? Does it not? And, what are the parameters of that usage? So it's very clear on what that academic integrity is. Now, with that in mind, right, students are still going to push the boundaries or do things we're not aware of, or those sort of things. We certainly use Turnitin as our tool for always looking for plagiarism. It also has the ability to look for some AI generated content. That, along with GPT-0 and a bunch of other tools that I've tried, are absolutely not fail-proof whatsoever. I mean, they really sometimes flag things written by a human as, written by Chat GPT or other, and sometimes the other way around. It just completely misses it. So I think our approach has been much more to, again, figure out how we incorporate it into our curriculum. So that the one example I gave before about having Chat GPT generate essays and being able to then critique it, right? It's almost put yourself in the role of an educator. And, if it writes an essay, did it have a good introductory paragraph? Did it have a good conclusory paragraph? Were the points well supported? Did it have topic sentences? Those are the sort of things where, you can sort of work hand in hand with those tools and incorporate them into, what you're doing. And at the end of the day, I think we're seeing a lot of different faculty members take different approaches to doing some oral examinations and sprinkling that in there to make sure the students are actually getting some of the fundamentals, using the tools. And I still have some faculty that are basically, no, you cannot use this tool in my class, and there's an expectation you won't, and then we just have to sort of rely on the integrity of the students, which is probably hard to do. So I think that's been the view generally. And I would say that I was somewhat surprised when I first introduced this conversation, especially to some of my older and well-established faculty that had been, there for 25, 30 years. And, their answer was, this is really cool. How can I start using this as part of what I'm doing? And again, that's what really started our journey of how do I put resources in the faculty hands so they can start playing with it, setting up some labs so they can see it. And then, when they got past some of the shock and awe and sort of laughing at some of the outputs and saying, this is really, really neat. It's almost like, at one point we saw calculators come into the math class. We're like, oh, students won't remember their multiplication tables anymore. They really don't, they need some of those fundamentals, but, really to be effective in this world, Excel does all that for you, right? So again, it's really about preparing people to be citizens of the world, and make them effective in the tools that they have available, as long as, again, they're getting the fundamentals, they're learning, they're understanding, and then working hand in hand from there.
That's excellent points for both of you. And I think the key question then people have to ask themselves is, is my style of teaching or instruction, allowing for innovation with AI, or am I just worried about locking things down so that kids can't use AI in the classroom? And I think, if you take the secondary perspective, you end up missing out on opportunities because you're so focused on catching kids cheating or catching kids abusing it, instead of thinking, how do I change the style of teaching I'm doing to allow for this, but to still gauge where the students are at, make sure that they're learning something, making sure they're gaining those skills that they need. And that really brings a good question to, do you think that students and even schools really could become over-reliant on AI? And could that affect their future learning and maybe even their future prospects? Or should we not be worried about that?
I'll go on that one first, if that's okay. Yeah, I think we should definitely be worried about it. Not just students. I mean, just us in general. I joke with my students, although trying to make a point sometimes, because I'll walk into the classroom and almost all of their faces are in their phones, or they're walking through the halls and they're in the phones. And adults do the same thing too. And I know over the last couple of years, it seems like that has increased. I don't want to say the word worsened. I'll just say that it has increased. And I don't know if it's because when schools were closed and people just became used to oh, I'm in school and I'm also on my phone because I'm virtual and I'm multitasking, or we just got used to doing so many things. It is definitely a concern that, you can over rely on something, especially if you find oh, wow, you know what, I do newsletters or I write lesson plans and it saves me all of this time. And on a teacher level, or if students are wow, I have to write essays of 40 pages and they keep using it. I don't think in some cases that there's anything wrong with relying on something if it saves you time that then benefits in other ways. For example, there are a lot of clerical tasks and things that we have in our work and in our daily lives that are time consuming and take us away from maybe spending time with students or with colleagues or whatever. I think using something meaningfully and purposefully that frees up time for us to do something that's more important or time sensitive, then I think that's okay with a slight over reliance on it, especially if it's, doing a lot of good and has benefits. But as with all things, I mean, from a teacher perspective, in the classroom, everybody always says, oh, all the technology, and technology is great. There's a lot of benefits to it, especially in looking at providing differentiation for students and access to resources and finding answers to things really quickly. But I try to balance a lot of things. And some days, I mean, we'll do a quick game. And some days the students are like, we didn't play a game today. I'm like, no, we had conversations. We did activities. I held up flashcards, dry erase boards. It's not always the technology. I use it when it has the purpose. And I'm also trying to make sure that there's a nice variety, because not all the kids like to learn with the technology, and so for some of them, it's they're on the screen so much too that I want to take a break from that sometimes as well. And so from a teacher perspective, again, it comes down to us being intentional about how we're using the technology and modeling for students hey, this is a great way that you can use this, but here are some other ideas that you can use that don't involve the technology as well. But there's no shortage of options out there. So it's kind of like finding balance, right? How do you even find balance? That's the other big question, the balance and the over-reliance. So I don't know. What do you think, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should just take the lessons learned of technologies that's entered the classroom in the past, right? So again, the calculators, the spreadsheets, Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia not being a primary source and saying that that's not an appropriate thing to cite to, and that you still need to do the work. I think as we've learned with generative AI, I'm sure everyone's heard about the hallucinations. That it can just make stuff up. Again, this is where the classes I think are fun, and maybe I'm too much of a nerd for a lot of the folks on the phone, but it's a statistical model, That's all ChatGPT is. It's statistically deciding what the next word should be. Based upon the prompt and everything else. And so it's really kind of dumb under the covers. And so it's going to make things up. And of course, the classic examples for those who may not have heard about hallucinations. Again, I'll pull on one of the legal aspects, which was, when a lawyer presents information to a court, that information, if you are lying to the court, has huge consequences to it. And there's a couple of famous cases where they've had some younger lawyers that pull briefs and they submit them to the court, and they use things like ChatGPT, and ChatGPT completely made up some court cases that didn't exist, but sound just right for what they're trying to argue. And when the court looked up the cases, said, I can't find this case, it doesn't exist. And we've actually had some attorneys disbarred and some disciplinary action against them for doing those sort of things. So, even as we're start talking about over reliance, again, I would just take things like Wikipedia. Okay, you read the Wikipedia article. Did you go look at the primary resources, under there? Did you actually read that article? Do you agree with what they're saying? Same thing with ChatGPT. Even if you ask it to compose something, do you agree with what it's saying? Can you really confirm it? Why is it accurate? Maybe why is it not? And so, certainly we can start to become reliant on these things. They make our lives easier. I don't know how many folks have had a chance to use Copilot built into Microsoft Office 365 yet, but you could take a Word document and ask it to create a PowerPoint for you, or you could ask it to analyze a PDF file and do some really amazing things. So, I guess I tend to think about it more as it's really great at the arm and leg work, but it's that thinking aspect and that critical aspect and the, really trying to derive the value and other things that are where it gets interesting. I mean, even when we start generating art, right? Art is a very creative thing, and it's something that is, in the eye of the observer. And so, is it a question of the effort that went into generating it, or is it a question in terms of how it's being used? And, even think about the great works of art over time. They're always social commentary is what makes them great. Not just, hey, that's a cool looking picture. I mean, yeah, it's I don't have that talent at all, so I'm always amazed when I see somebody that can draw things that look like the background that Rachelle has behind her. Right, that's amazing sort of things. That even may be AI generated, I don't know, but it's cool, but there's no social commentary there, right? And so again, when we get to education, that's the value. It's the commentary, it's the thinking, it's the creativity, it's all of those things combined. And really, again, just sort of looking at these tools and how they help us do the sort of tedious, boring part to enable us to spend more time on the things that are really the value add, I think is where we can avoid some of that over reliance.
100%. And I think your points, both of you, about the critical thinking aspect is really what's important. I think for years, former educator here, a lot of us had to teach to the test, and was, can you fill in the bubble with the correct answer? And what was really missing was our students learn these facts and figures, but can they take that information and actually solve a problem, understand what happened? Can they come up with a new solution because of what they've learned from it? It's the critical thinking aspect. And AI is going to spit stuff out based off of human created content. So it's pulling from already created human content. So we still have to be the creators of the original content, which, since y'all brought up the legal, we got to jump to the legal side a little bit. There's a lot of legislation, court cases, things going on regarding copyright and who owns certain things created by ChatGPT, and are they allowed to take from material that's owned? So without getting too deeply into it, how do you see the legal aspect, the legislation, these potential infringements on copyright coming into play with the future of AI, and what that might mean for the classroom or for things that students create using AI in the future? Russ, I know that's your area of expertise, so if you want to dive on that.
I was just going to say,
jump in on this, and again, I
Yeah.
hope I don't sound overly negative, but I'm very concerned. I really am. I mean, as much as some of the words I hear sometimes when people are talking about AI is scary. This is scary. It's dangerous. There's over reliance. There's, I think we as humans look at this thing and I think back to your own experience. The first time you saw ChatGPT respond to something, you kind of probably had an emotional, visceral reaction to it, like, oh, that's bad in some way. right? And you take legislators in Washington when they see things and they go, "Oh, that's bad," right? Their first reaction many times is, "What can we do to sort of stop this or slow it down?" And so there's a lot of legislation being bandied around in Washington that is really trying to, I mean, a lot of it has very good intention, right? I talked about things like equity and getting rid of bias and making sure we don't have, decisions being made by AI that are, racist or, different negative aspects. And so obviously very supportive of those things. But at the same time, I worry about them pushing back on some of the innovation. And so, there's the famous case right now, the New York Times that is sued OpenAI, basically saying, you used our copyrighted material, and we can tell because we've seen, outputs that are basically verbatim one of the New York Times stories. I can't give an opinion on how that case is going to go because I don't think any lawyer can give an opinion really on how that case is going to go because it needs to go through the courts. But it's certainly, if you get some of these major content providers pushing back against these major frameworks, they're going to be in real trouble in terms of how they advance. So it could really stall substantially what's going on. And certainly, as much as ChatGPT and OpenAI is on everybody's mouths, they don't make much revenue, right? They have very high costs without making a lot of money. They don't have the dollars to license something like New York Times. So they lose that lawsuit. That's kind of the end of a lot of either the usefulness of their models or the end of the company. So, there's a lot to be determined there. Now, for all of us, right, that are thinking about, well, what I'm putting into ChatGPT, do I own it? Again, what I would say is make sure you are working. I have a general counsel at my university. Folks who are in different situations obviously should be talking to their individual counsels on how they're doing things. But I would be very concerned about, claiming credit for things that are coming out of some of these tools. So I think, again, you can use them to supplement, you can use them for some basics. But like anything else, if you're over reliant on somebody else to help write things for you and then you're editing it, it's just like a human. You have to be very careful in those things. I think just the last thing I would talk about is for anybody who's very interested, NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, they came out with a framework called Risk Management Framework for AI. It came out in January of last calendar year. And it basically creates a really nice framework of how to be thinking about AI, from the ethical considerations to the transparency. Like, do I understand what it's actually doing? Can I replicate things? Can I explain things? Can I make sure it's not giving me sort of these weird negative outcomes? Even if you're not a practitioner and want to get deep into understanding that, even reading through some of those frameworks, and they're written in very easy to understand English, I think. It sort of is a good thing to look at and say, okay, when I'm thinking about AI, these are really good considerations that both the legal folks are thinking about, the regulators are thinking about, and me just as a practitioner could be thinking about.
Yeah, and Russ, I was going to bring up the New York Times as well, because that is something, because I was doing some reading and writing over the past weekend about AI, and specifically like focusing on ethics and copyright and trying to just delve more deeply into that area, and went back and I read the article that I had seen. I think it was from the end of December was the article that I had, one of the articles that I had read, and talking about exactly what you said. And that it made me think like, okay, so how many more lawsuits like that are going to come up? And what is that going to mean for, OpenAI at this point, and for all these other tools we can use? And and I almost forgot, in answer to your question, my background is not generative AI. It's an actual hotel that's in South America. So it does, but I did pick it for that reason, because it looks kind of like AI generated. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with it, because I know the copyright issue was something that it's, people have been asking. And even in my research, working on my doctorate now, a lot of the places like Purdue OWL and different places are talking about how you cite that you got it from OpenAI, but really it's not like citing anything specific. It's just saying like OpenAI and the date, and that's it. Which there are some, like I've used Perplexity AI that gives you some different answers and gives you some resources and some things. And one of them, of course, is always Wikipedia at the top, just without a doubt. But it will be interesting to see how these lawsuits do end up, and to kind of keep track on that. I think that'll be interesting. And it's another thing I'll just add real quickly too, is just even in class a couple of years ago with my 8th graders, one of them, we were talking about ethics, and it was just a very brief conversation to start. And they said, I really wish that ethics was part of like our school program, like ongoing, that it was either a whole class or it was talked about in each class or everything. And this is years ago, before this, this past year, which has been so quick. But they are interested in it, and the ethics and the importance of that and all these other considerations. So we'll see when it comes to using it, like plagiarism and citing your sources, and the generative component, like the art, especially, like, did you actually create it? Who owns it? Can generative AI, can it hold a copyright? There's lots of questions out there.
There was actually one case that did have an outcome
Yeah.
on that, Rachelle, which was, it was a collection of anime cartoons that were brought into sort of a booklet. And the way the court decided in that case is that the person who collected them and brought them into a collection, they own sort of the copyright on the collection, but the individual images, they decided in that case was not sufficiently creative. So the person didn't have the copyright to any of the individual images. So, that's at least one that we have an outcome to. And look, I think as educators, obviously continuing to look at fair use is important when it comes to copyright, right? So even if you are using copyrighted materials, the fact that you're using them for educational purposes is one of the big ways that you can make a fair use argument. I think you get into a little bit stickier waters if you're trying to claim that this is your original work and that you want to publish it in a book or a paper or something else. That's where we're definitely, Rachelle, I think you can't be too careful, and always better to oversight, even if you don't have it quite right, than to try and claim it as your own, because it may come back to bite you at some point.
Good, not legal advice from Russ and Rachelle on that front too. And as we get to the end of our webinar, we absolutely want to give people a chance to ask questions. So feel free to ask them in the chat panel, and we'll do our best to get to them. I know there've been a couple so far, and hopefully we've addressed them in what we've been talking about so far about adopting AI and about adapting our lessons, adapting our policies and approaches based off of the introduction of AI. I would just conclude with kind of a broader question about how AI should be taught as part of the curriculum. Now, if someone could ask the question, should it? And I think we all agree it should. But the question is just how it gets taught as part of the curriculum, whether it's, classes on AI, whether it's incorporating AI into classes themselves, like you guys are talking about the ethical classes and incorporating learning about the law and ethics, and then using critical thinking to understand how it's going to impact AI. So just on that kind of perspective, how do you feel like AI should be brought about into the curriculum? What would that ideally look like for you at the K-12 or at the higher ed level?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be brought in early on. And the reason is because the kids are surrounded by it. Like we said before, I mean, it's everywhere. I do some activities with my students where it has like the 10 most common everyday uses of AI. And I'm like, give yourself a point for every one of these that you have. And I have students that are like, have a 9 out of 10. I mean, there are things like smart home devices, facial recognition on the phone, commuting, like there's a lot of them. There's obviously 10 of them, but there are resources that are out there available for K through 12 and beyond. And there are simple activities to do to get students, like there's a great video series, and I forget who the woman is that runs it, but she goes through and explains different concepts, like artificial intelligence is one of them, and to different students of different ages. So she sits down and has a conversation with a 5-year-old, with like a 10-year-old, with somebody that's like a junior in high school, and then somebody that's a university student. And the way that she goes about explaining it it's so easy to follow through, like across all of those different age levels. But a lot of those resources that are out there do have materials and lessons and everything available for students in grades, even pre-K. There's activities you can do all the way through 12. And where does it fit? I know, like for elementary teachers, there are so many things they have to cover, but it's just even just pockets of information that you could do. Even like a teacher using generative AI to create some kind of a drawing or something, and having young kids like describe it. What do you see? What are the shapes? What are the animals? Giving it a prompt. And if it's blocked in your school, then just do it outside, bring in the screenshot, put it up there and say, I use, generative AI to do this. Like, how would you describe it? A language teacher could do that. There's lots of possibilities just to bring it in, but also to make, the ethics and the academic integrity and all of that part of the conversation too, like how to use the technology, because it's always like, not what am I going to use? It's why am I using it? And then like, how is it going to enhance, improve, transform learning, or make my job work better, or help me work faster, or something like that. Russ?
For us in higher ed, I mean, obviously there are, specializations in AI, and I think we'll continue to see more certificate programs and undergraduate and graduate degrees in there, especially more applied AI fields. I know Creighton University, for example, we're the largest Catholic health educator in the nation. So for us, that idea of having ethical AI for our health practitioners, be it nurses, doctors, physicians assistants, dentists, absolutely is an area that we're continuing to expand upon. We also, have a core technology curriculum that we build in for all of our undergraduates, right? Because there's a part where they need to understand how to use statistical tools. They need to know how to do, some basics that are just expected of them as people in the world. And so we're incorporating some of the AI pieces into that as well. And then really relying upon our faculty to integrate it into their curriculum for sort of, again, those applied versions. And Rachelle, I love that example, actually. I really love that idea of, even doing some collaborative prompt engineering with students, right? Like, hey, imagine we want a picture of this. How would you describe it? And then it'd be really fascinating to even ask everyone, on your own piece of paper, write what you think this is going to look like, and then see what comes out of the AI tool. I think there's lots of opportunities there to play with that and explore how it's working or how it's different, or, hey, how would you make it look more like your picture? Because the version that came out is very different than what you drew. I think that's also some really and I'm sure I've even thought about it. So thank you for the idea. But the whole, what do you expect the output to be, and then run it, and then compare your results with those results, and see, like, were you wrong in the prompt, or was it better, or were your ideas better? I think there's lots of ways to be able to incorporate that into curriculum.
Those are excellent ideas. It reminds me of something I saw where someone tested out AI, all the different AIs, and asked the same thing to do, like, I think it was like an image of a puppy in a flower field, and each one generated something completely different. And it was curious about, like, okay, if I tweak this and said sunflowers versus roses, and like learning about how to get the vision that you have in your head out with AI. And it really requires you to be very critical about what you're saying, what you're asking, how you want things to turn out in the style of Van Gogh, or like in the style of, Monet. Like, I'm being very specific about things. So that's a fun activity for everybody to take home to their classes and to start. We had an interesting question in the chat. What do you think, and you may not be familiar with this, what do you think about Elon Musk's vision of AI becoming a student's best possible personal tutor? And it may require going to watch, is anyone familiar with that? Or have either of you two seen that?
Yeah.
Then speak to it. Okay, good. Just making sure. Then what do you think about it?
No, and Russ brought this up before too, about the like the building confidence and speaking and interacting with that. And last summer, I was at the ISTE conference and had an opportunity to interview Kevin Roos, who had written a book called Future Proof. And we talked about AI and the use of, it as like, teachers are using it as their teaching assistant and virtual tutors. And I can say, like, we were talking about math at some point here, and one of my many courses was in statistics, and it was a challenge for me last summer. And it was an online course. I have no idea how many students the teacher had, how many courses he was teaching. I sent an email, but I needed help. So I used ChatGPT. It was not very good at adding up math problems. I will say it made some mistakes that cost me a couple of hours in my calculations, but that's okay, lesson learned. But I know that I have some students who have said, like, I'm studying for a chemistry test and I want it to quiz me, or I want to practice my typing skills, or, whatever, because there are some that analyze speech as well. And it is uncomfortable to, make mistakes, or you're afraid of saying something incorrectly, or whatever the case may be. And in some ways, it can help you to build that confidence so that then you feel more comfortable speaking in the classroom, or it provides access to an answer or to like just a little bit of information that gets you to that next step. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's going to be the best possible personal tutor, because we're talking about AI, and there's a great obvious value in the human connection as an educator. Like, AI can replace a lot of tasks, but the ability for me to sit down and know the student and talk to them in an authentic way and give them meaningful feedback that relates to them is far more valuable. Like, you can keep, I love AI. I love all the things that you can do with it. But if I had to trade off having those relationships with the students or working with my colleagues and things like that, one versus the other, I wouldn't do that. So I wouldn't say the best possible. I would say that it is, it is a tutor. It can be a tutor, and it can be very helpful in some cases, but it should not be a replacement for having an actual person to rely on, whether you're a student or just in the world of work, because we always need to ask for help. We're always asking for help and giving support. But sometimes when you need it, it's just like going to YouTube to figure out how to do something, like how many times people have done that because you're like, I'm not going to do that. I want to figure it out. I did it for statistics the first time. So now I use ChatGPT, but so that's kind of my feeling on it. Can it be, it has been used as a tutor. Is it going to be the best possible personal one? Maybe for some people, they might think it is because it's a comfort issue and that asking for help. So I don't know. What do you think, Russ?
I get to circle back to my Amara's law, right? So I agree with you. Like, in terms of the capabilities of what AI has today and probably over the next couple of years, it really is a supplement. It is not going to be able to really do the guided piece you have. At the same point, as a cabinet member of a leadership at a university, we're always thinking about, okay, well, we're under this whole K-Bridge unit, approach to learning and teaching, where we have cohorts of students that are all, in theory, learning at the same pace across the same curriculum. And the reality is that we're all individuals. We learn differently. We learn at a pace differently. And so I really would love to embrace that ability to figure out how we become more personalized in our instruction to individuals and get away from the idea of you must take these 3 credits in this class to be able, and more around what capabilities do you have and how can I enhance and go beyond it. So I really like Elon Musk's vision. Personally, it's something actually Steve Ballmer has been talking about at Microsoft for a very long time, since really the early 2000s, around how can we get to personalized teaching, instruction, and enhancement, and also supplements where you have a student who's falling behind. What are ways that I can do to get them to be more rudimentary and catch up, as opposed to social progression to the next class, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse for them. So, again, back to that Mars law, I think in 5 years' time, I would probably have a very different answer than I do right now. But for right now, it's a great vision, and we'll have to figure out how we execute it on in the future.
I think that's a good place to wrap things up. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with AI. I hope everyone will join me in thanking Rachelle and Russ for joining us today and being our experts on AI and giving us your wonderful thoughts and opinions about what's going on in the world of AI. You can check out the NetSupport page, netsupportsoftware.com, for all the links to register free for the webinars. Rachelle, Russ, thank you guys so much for being here today. And thank you everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yeah.